supposed
I call to order the June 2024 meeting of the Audit and Compliance Committee of the University of Minnesota Board of Regents. Welcome, everyone. Thanks to those of you who are joining via live stream, and I think we'll have some folks joining us via Zoom as well. Let me welcome our student representative for today, Cole Gronchong from the Duluth campus. Hi, Cole. I'd also like to welcome Chair Farnsworth, who is or will be joining us via Zoom. Our first item of business this morning is an update on the university's Identity and Access Management collaborative assessment. To provide us with the update are Vice President Golchek and Senior Director Nathan Kufner. Chief Auditor Galswick, would you like to introduce them?
Yeah, thank you, Chair Gully and members of the committee. So today's presentation is an update from the administration's efforts to address risks identified in our 2020 collaborative assessment on identity and access management. So before I turn it over to Vice President Golchek and Senior Director Kufner, I just wanted to kind of remind the committee of what this assessment was and how the follow-up is a little bit unique for how we're handling the remediation of the risks identified. So as a reminder, the collaborative assessment is an approach that we piloted with the Identity and Access Management Program in 2020. The purpose of the approach is to review a broad university process where there's already generally agreed upon risks. And instead of spending our time as internal audit doing some of our detailed walkthroughs and detailed testing, we thought that we should work with the administration and say, let's think about the risks that we know are there and then what is our mitigation plans going forward. So given the breadth and complexity of the issues and the risks that we were dealing with here, we always knew this was going to be a multi-year effort. And so to do follow-up related to, we've been providing you periodic updates as part of our internal audit update. And then periodically having Bernie and Nathan come and present to the committee. This presentation is likely going to be the last one before we actually come back and start doing some internal audit work, doing some assessment work. We'll talk about this later on our FY25 audit plan, but we're holding some time to take a few of these risks and dig in a little bit deeper to make sure internal audits and agreements on the remediation steps that have taken place. So with that, I will turn it over to Vice President Golchek.
Okay. Thank you, Quinn. Regent Gully, members of the committee, thank you for having us here today. At the time that the collaborative assessment was complete, internal audit and the Office of Information Technology identified 25 discrete risks that fit into two categorical areas: strategy and governance and day-to-day operations. As you see in this chart, 16 of those risks were identified as high, 4 as medium, and 5 as low. These are the risks that have informed the work that has been done since 2020 and the reporting that you've seen since then. I want to make sure that I ground this conversation in an understanding of identity and access management as a very core component to an effective cybersecurity program. If you don't know who needs access to either data or systems and can put controls around those, the rest of cybersecurity doesn't matter. You start by understanding who those people are and what access they should have. And so the risks that you see in front of you are components of doing identity and access management well. So to provide a current progress report on the program, I'll now turn the presentation to Mr. Nathan Kufner, who is the Senior Director for Identity and Access Management and who came to the university to lead this effort from US Bank. Nathan.
Thank you, Vice President Golchek, Chair Gully, and members of the committee. I will begin by briefly reviewing what we covered in last year's presentation. At this time last year, my team, the IAM team, had several initiatives in progress. During last year's presentation, we projected significant improvements in the collaborative assessment findings by the end of 2025. Members of the committee, I am pleased to report that the IAM team, in collaboration with our institutional partners, have implemented the changes necessary to realize our goal of risk reduction. This includes recently implemented routine email access changes in alignment with the collaborative assessment, and doing so in a way that preserves the continuity of the university's mission. To better understand how we are achieving this change in risk, we'll need to review some of the work accomplished in the past year. Our most notable progress involves changes to university email and Google Workspace. In this endeavor, IAM collaborated with key stakeholders such as academic support resources, the Office of Human Resources, the University of Minnesota Foundation, and many others, to determine when a person no longer requires a university email account. These stakeholders analyze business practices from across the institution to help define our technology management strategy. Now, I want to emphasize the importance of this work and what it means for the university's future. This project represents more than managing email access. It involves establishing new practices, patterns, and tools to improve how the university governs technology access, while ensuring each department can meet their needs so that they can continue to serve the university community. Additionally, the IAM team was also able to retire a 30-year-old legacy system, which previously resisted multiple retirement attempts due to how deeply integrated it was with university technology and business processes. The IAM team was also able to refresh critical infrastructure and improve our disaster recovery posture. And I think it's also important to recognize the significant workload involved in operational tasks that keep this institution running. IAM technology impacts every single person and business process. This high-impact, complex work was only possible because of the dedication of the Identity and Access Management team, along with the collaboration and support of our partners. All of this important progress and the work that will occur before the end of the calendar year will alter the risks to what you see here on this slide. Last year, we had 12 high, 7 medium, and 6 low risk. By the end of this year, we are on track to change that to 4 high, 13 medium, and 8 low risk findings. I'd like to briefly discuss a few elements of this work. In the terms of criteria for deprovisioning, we now have policies for students, staff, and other university community members to automatically manage technology access as they transition in their relationship with the university. In the area of business and operational requirements, the university had to establish clear rules based on their business and operational needs so that we could deliver the outcomes achieved in criteria for deprovisioning. And in the area of access termination, we are on track to implement changes to ensure that the university has the standards for when an internet ID is no longer required to support the mission so that we can turn it off. Chair Gully, I'd like to turn the presentation back to Vice President Galacek to conclude our remarks.
Thank you, Nathan. The initiatives that you see on this slide are those that are on our work plan for the next 2 years, and they will further mitigate the risks that you previously saw on previous slides and will add new needed functionality and automation. These efforts include refinements in the university's approach to how it manages access to data and to systems, as well as a replacement of the current aged identity management product. Finally, and as previously mentioned, there have been and will continue to be challenges as we continue this work. These challenges are mainly focused in the areas of people change management, business process development, and cross-unit dependencies. Helping each and every university community member understand these changes and their role in them as a university citizen is of greatest importance. Developing standardized business processes where they have been absent, or arguably for nearly 30 years, is a significant challenge because, of course, the technology teams work in a hyper-collaborative way with units who are responsible for business processes and the data transactions that occur in them. The effort that our student administration and our human resources teams have contributed cannot be understated in this particular area. Automation at scale cannot be done with data that you don't understand or is done 6 ways to Sunday. Successful identity and access management practice requires standardization and thoughtful planning before doing. This is why peak is of the utmost importance to this particular area of information technology. Both of these are counterculture in a university environment where the reward systems are innovation and immediate solutions. Finally, the greatest challenge to progress in this practice is people. Our limitation is the amount of staff effort that is available to do the work. So in closing, I'd like to thank this committee and the board for their support over the last 4 years and into the future. I cannot express to you how important that has been as these teams wrestle through these heavy lifts and make these necessary changes in the way that information technologies manage identity and access management. As you saw in your docket materials, and as Quinn mentioned, this will be the final formal presentation and last status update provided to you on this topic until the results of an audit that will occur next year are shared with you. Madam Chair, members of the committee, this concludes our progress report and presentation. Mr. Kuffner and I stand ready to answer your questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Are there questions or comments from committee members? Regent Davenport.
Thank you, Co-Chair Gully. I want to commend you and your staff moving from 16 red alerts to 12 to 4 that you're working on. That's a lot of work. There's, when you talk about standardization and rules, not everyone's happy. And from some of the email traffic we got, it's, you got to do it. So appreciate your hard work on that. I travel down here, I wake up to the news alarm in the morning, and the thing I woke up to this morning was IT workers and cybersecurity workers and the churning in the workforce. And are you having any difficulty or market stress in that sense in terms of keeping your workforce full scale? Because I know in the audit office, that's an issue. So I'm just wondering about your area.
Regent Davenport, members of the committee, I think that's a great question. We are not challenged by the market today. This is a rich market. There are a number of Fortune 500 companies here, and we have a very well-functioning talent and acquisition team in the Office of Human Resources that is specialized in IT that helps us ensure that we get the right people. It's the number of people that we have. This kind of work takes effort, and it takes a lot of time. And as you've heard, you have to be careful. And so moving too quickly, if you don't have enough staff, they are under pressures to deliver. And that's where I worry about the little things done very, very well. Our attrition rate is at 8%, which at this point, I think that's a healthy attrition rate. And so in answer to your question, we aren't having challenges with the market as much as we are with the number of people that we have working on these efforts.
And they're not going to go away. The stressors, the challenges.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Regent Davenport and presenters. Oh, Regent Kenyanya, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Vice President, Mr. Kuffner, for the presentation. Vice President Galacek, possibly the most important thing you said was right at the end. It didn't even get a slide, but it was the comment about people, about business processes. And I also understand why you didn't focus too much on that, because some of that is outside your purview and your influence, right? I mean, when we look at the list of things put before us, I mean, even when we're talking about IAM strategy and governance, that's within IT for the most part. But none of this, I don't want to say none of this, but most of this doesn't work if the processes, the practices aren't following this and aren't there to support this. So I was hoping you could talk. You mentioned peak, and I can certainly understand how that standardization would be helpful. I was hoping you could talk more about that, and just as we've gone through this, not just peak, but not only in the context of peak, how the university community has been a partner in this, and how we've worked through some of those practices. You could put the IAM softwares in place, but when do admitted students get an account versus not get an account? That's not entirely your call. That's a conversation you have to have with admissions, right? Can you talk a bit about that?
Regent Kenyanya, members of the committee, thank you for asking that question, because it illustrates the hyper-alignment that I referenced earlier. So Vice President Horstman and our student in the Office of Human Resource, he knows when people are coming into the university. In our student administration group, they know when students are admitted. IT has nothing to do with that, but we are listening to systems and changes in those systems that then trigger the kinds of things that you see in identity and access management. And so that it essentially illustrates the close relationship and how closely we have to work together in order to make this a successful program. The good news for the board is that we are hyper-aligned, and IT isn't stepping into that process. That process is owned by HR and student administration. And so that just illustrates the alignment that's occurring in the administrative function at the university. But standardized data that we trigger on to take action is absolutely essential. And when everybody's entering data, you get farther away from standardization, repeatability, and the kind of expectation that you need to be able to automate. As I said, you can't automate what you don't know or is done 6 ways to Sunday. And so Peak and the service centers that are in place and are growing as a result of the phasing of Peak is helping this effort. It's helping the standardization of data that we listen to be able to do identity and access management well. These all tie together, and I'm hopeful and I'm grateful that you asked that question. I'm hopeful that you understand the importance of standardization in these areas.
Last question, Madam Chair. Yeah, thank you. That was very helpful. Appreciate you sharing that. I think this one's for the Chief Auditor. So you mentioned that I think the next step will now be an actual assessment, right? Going back, can you talk about how Audit then approaches assessing something where there was part of a collaborative assessment, because there was a level of involvement that's probably more typical than the other subjects you might audit. So is that approach any different than any other audit now going back?
Thank you, Regent Kenyanya, Chair Gully. So the approach that we took towards the initial collaborative assessment was the piece that was, I think, a little bit more innovative. My expectation is with this follow-up assessment, we aren't going to be, just to set expectations, we're not going to be able to go through all 25 of these risks. This is a huge amount of work in a very, very large space. What I'm expecting to do is we'll take a few of these in next fiscal year, and we'll treat it more of like a standard audit, where we're going to do the walkthroughs, gather the evidence, and provide a report on the issues that we see, and if there are any essential issues, we'll do follow-up and look for remediation, more typical of how we would handle a standard audit. So the short answer to your question is the process for confirming the remediation will be more similar to a standard audit, even though this was a much different approach for our initial assessment.
Thank you.
Other questions? Okay. Seeing no further questions on this issue, our next item is an internal audit update. Chief Auditor Goswick, please proceed. And thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Gelly, members of the committee. So the internal audit update begins on page 16 of your docket material. As a reminder to the committee, this is information on the work that we have completed over the last 4 months. In my next presentation, I'll be talking about more of an overall fiscal year view of FY24. The follow-up results are detailed on page 19, as we were just discussing. We go back and look at our highest risk issues that are identified in reports and confirm that remediation is happening. There's an expected goal rate of 40% implementation. This period we hit 34%, which is below again our expectation, but it is relatively close. And I want to highlight 53%, over half of the outstanding items are from audits receiving first-time follow-up. We had a couple of large audits with a number of issues, and less than a third of the outstanding issues are currently past due. And I think we have a situation where I think we have a large amount of issues that are kind of working through the system. I'm not overly concerned about this implementation rate. However, I will continue to let the committee know that if there are any issues or if there's any additional pressure or support that we need in order to get this work done in the future. There are 4 audits that have a total of 5 items that have been open for 2 years. Those are detailed on page 20 of your docket materials. There's the UMD School of Fine Arts, which I'm happy to say that the inventory there for the Tweed Museum is now in progress. They're making good progress on that. And they've hired a new director at the Tweed Museum who's going to be tasked with establishing ongoing inventory and appraisal processes to make sure that those stay ahead of it going forward. For University Health Safety and Risk Management, they're still continuing to work on implementation of a safety training program that is more institution-wide. They've contracted with an outside vendor that's begun to review and update their safety training protocols, and they're working with IT back to this question of data and flagging, another place where this is all interrelated. How do we pull that information to figure out who do we need to assign what training in a more consistent way? Dentistry has 2 of their 27 items that are still open. This is very much related to staffing constraints and resource constraints. This is related to accounts receivable work, but they continue to make progress on that, and we expect that those will be closed by next period. For UMDHR, there is 1 item that's still open that's related to the defining of roles and responsibilities, which they're working through now that PEAK has really been implemented up in Duluth. So it's kind of a work in progress to see how their internal processes are going to interface with PEAK. The other UMDHR item, we're actually closing this period. This is detailed more on page 23 of your docket materials, but this is a situation where administration is choosing to accept the risk associated with the outstanding issue. So as a reminder to the committee, there was an issue in this report related to the UMD trade unions operating without a contract. OHR, UMDHR, and OGC have worked with the representatives of the unions to try to establish a contract with them, but they haven't really been able to get them to engage in those discussions. So OHR, in consultation with OGC and UMDHR, is deciding to accept this risk. Given the small number of employees this impacts, I believe it's less than 10, the fact that without a contract, they currently operate under what's referred to as past practice. And overall, both the union employees and UMD have been happy with the services that have been provided and the responsiveness to any concerns or issues. So I'm supportive of this risk acceptance. I think it makes sense given the few number of employees and the work that the administration has done. But as required by board policy, we need to provide you this information to note that this is a formal level of risk acceptance. Another follow-up area I want to highlight is related to Next Gen Med. We've been informed that the Google Student Engagement Platform, or SEP, is no longer in use by those students. Instead, Next Gen Med is leveraging existing university technology, and OIT and UMR are working with Google to develop new tools that may be able to support not just the Next Gen Med students, but the broader student population. Google's doing this work with OIT and UMR at no additional cost given the previous investments. We expect we'll close the issues associated with the SEP during our next follow-up period, but we just want to confirm that the plan is going forward, that it will no longer be used before we do that. As another reminder to the committee, there is also a presentation today on mission fulfillment related to distributed learning. Though NextGen Med itself is not distributed learning, it's part of the suite of programs that does include some distributed learning, so there might be an opportunity to ask additional questions there. Finally, related to follow-up, there are 3 audits that remediated all remaining essential findings. We always want to give a shout out to them. There's a whole lot of work that goes into doing that. So that's detailed on page 33 of your material. Additional item that we include as in just our June docket materials, which we've included since fiscal year 2022, is on page 22 of your docket materials. And this is a schedule that shows the implementation rates of issues based upon fiscal year of the report. And what we're really trying to get to with this report is not so much a focus on the count of issues, because not all issues are, or not all the recommendations are created the same as they're detailed in there, but trying to show a trending of, are we seeing ones that are taking a lot longer to remediate for, over the years. In that report, you can see that there was an increase of number of items that took over 2 years for the FY19 and FY20 reports, which is consistent with the timing of the pandemic and a lot of other constraints. And then that's starting to subside, but there's now an uptick again in FY 2022 of items that are still outstanding. We believe that this increase reflects a combination of the complexity of meeting some of those issues, as we were just talking about some of those items that have taken over 2 years, as well as, again, the staffing constraints and just other priorities that units are working. Moving on from follow-up into audit activity, on page 35 of your docket material, this is a summary of all the work that we have done over the last 4 months. A whole lot of effort goes into all of these items that you see on this report, so it probably doesn't do enough justice to everything that the team does, but it gives you at least a quick snapshot. Over the last 4 months, we've completed 10 audits and 1 SNAP review related to the analysis of graduate assistants listed as the primary lecturer at the University of Minnesota Twin Cities for the Provost's office. The audit reports completed include 4 transition reviews, none that had any major issues. And we also had 6 standard audit reports, all of which we rated as good, which is our highest rating. And that might be our first that we've had 100% good. So that's always good to see. There are issues that were identified in these. I won't go through these in great detail just because we have a pretty full agenda today, but a couple of things to note on the reports that we issued. First, the CLA Department of Theater, Art, and Dance and the School of Music were 2 separate audits, but on your FY24 audit plan, we originally were thinking we were going to do those as 1 audit. During audit planning, we identified that their processes were much more different and had a lot of unique items, such as the School of Music with their music therapy program, for the theater department, risks associated with stage sets and designs, etc. We decided to split those into 2 separate audits, which does require additional work, but we thought that was appropriate. Other audits that we completed included the Office of Academic Clinical Affairs and Select Centers. This was a grouping of a number of centers that we haven't covered in other individual audits that roll up under OACA. Effort management, so the reporting on from individuals working on sponsored research to state the level of effort that they put towards their various sponsored projects. UMD facilities management, where we identified a number of issues here, but overall felt that given the inherent risks that they were managing, the risks, again, to that good rating. Some of the issues that we identified are related to the implementation of a new system. They're working with the university services here in the Twin Cities to implement their FM management system. And there's some additional oversight and monitoring that we think would be appropriate to leverage out of that system. So finally, on page 46 of your docket material, there is the remediation plans that reference peak. The schedule was updated over the last couple of periods based upon committee feedback, so that it now includes columns indicating what phase of peak units are in and their current status. As you'll see in the current status, there are a number of these where they've adjusted and believe that it's no longer going to roll up into peak, and they're going to look for other ways in which, in order to address the risks internally. And with that, that concludes my prepared remarks, and I'll stand for any questions you may have.
Thank you so much. Any discussion or questions? Regent Davenport.
Thank you, Vice Chair Gully. Thank you for that report. I want to circle back to our last conversation about IAM and peak, and some of the red that they're going to work on, shared accounts, third-party access, and that. It's not uncommon to see red in the control environment item of an audit, as an example. And you talk about rolling up into peak. So are these, some of these items, and I'm guessing control environment might be one, will overlay with peak and IAM to improve that? Because are they those kind of items that come into there individualized across the campus, and that's part of the problem?
Yes, Chair Gully, Regent Davenport. It's a good question. So when we did the IAM collaborative assessment, part of the reason we did it as this broader risk assessment is because we're really thinking about this institution-wide, very, very big picture, high level. To your point, we see, if we were to just try to track that down or follow that through into the various units, identity and access management issues are over a third of all IT issues that we write in every unit that we go to, where people do not have formalized processes. We find users that have inappropriate access, passwords not being managed, logging and monitoring not being conducted. It's a large number of the issues that we identified. And that was actually part of the impetus for doing the collaborative assessment originally, was saying we keep finding these issues in all these various units. Can we take a step back and say, what can we do at more of an institution-wide level to try to change this risk profile? Does that answer your question?
Yep, thank you.
Other questions or comments? Regent Kenyana, please.
Thank you. Trying to get back to the right page. Chief Auditor, appreciate the conversation presentation. Just a comment on the follow-up rates and implementation rates. I mean, I think we've talked about that a bit over the past few years. And I think even earlier in the presentation, there's the average over the past however many fiscal years. It has gotten better since I left committee leadership, so appreciate that. But so I know, I think in our previous conversation about this, we talked about, okay, well, is the target rate correct, or do we need to change that? And I remember one thing we talked about is maybe leading with there's a measure that factors in whether it's overdue or not, right? You talked about the complexity and how these audits are different. I mean, IAM that we just spoke about versus something else just requires a quick fix. Well, seeing them on the same chart, doesn't always give you that depth. So, and you already measure it, somewhere in here. But the more we can maybe have the units provide estimates, have audit validate them, say, okay, this is reasonable. It doesn't have to be exact, not really approve it, but this is within the realm of reason. And then measure against that. I mean, I think that's probably a more fair and insightful kind of number to lead. And it is there, but I feel like that's the one I'd kind of focus on.
Yeah. Chair Gully, Regent Kenyana. So a couple quick thoughts on that. So I agree that the past due is an important marker, and so that's why we're trying to highlight that more and including that in the schedule that we provide. And to your point, only a third or less than a third are actually past due from what the original expectations were for the items that are currently open. So I think that is good. I think that is illustrative of these are complex issues, and they knew that it was going to take time, and they're working through it. As we talked about back in October, when we talked about what is the right metric, the 40% number, again, it's been kind of a quick touchstone that we've used for over 30 years. Yeah. And the committee said that they wanted to continue to use that as a quick, canary effectively about how are we doing as an overall implementation rate, hoping that you're going to end up with a general mix of some more complex ones, some easy ones to resolve, et cetera. The other thing that we do, and maybe something to highlight, so if you look at our recent audits that we've issued, so if you look at page 37, for example, where we have the Department of Feeders, we will have an adequacy of the map listed. And there we will note, typically we just say good, but there will be times in which we will add comments where we'll say see below, where there could be times in which there's really, really extended timelines, and we think that that might be unreasonable. But we understand why management might be saying that, where it's, okay, we got to live with these risks for the next 2 years because we don't have the staffing. Well, I want to make sure that the committee realizes that we're not necessarily saying that that's reasonable that it's 2 years, but we understand that management is taking that position just given their realities. And so you always want to be careful if you focus too much on the past due question, you can end up with, what are the pressures that we're creating? So trying to provide more of a holistic picture is what we can choose.
Appreciate that.
Other questions or comments? Okay. We are once again with Chief Auditor Goswick to talk about our, consent report.
Nope.
Oh.
Audit plan.
Sorry, internal audit plan.
Oh, there it is.
You can cut stuff out of the agenda.
Yeah.
I just should check things off because I saw internal audit plan and then internal audit plan. Okay.
Yeah. Well,
Just him.
Yeah. Maybe our materials were so well done. You don't need the presentation.
That's right.
Thank you, Chair Gelly, members of the committee. So as I was saying before, we were just talking about our last 4 months. This is now transitioning to thinking about our overall fiscal year 2024 work, as well as what we intend to do for fiscal year 2025. So the topics that we're going to cover in this presentation, first the FY24 audit results briefly. We're going to talk about the risk assessment and audit plan development process before walking through the FY 2025 audit plan. And really trying as part of that FY 2025 audit plan discussion, talking about how we tie this out to some of the key institutional risks, strategic plan, et cetera. Then I'll briefly discuss how we tie our work into ERM and peak efforts that are currently underway at the institution, and then some other communications. Some of those other communications are actually required by Institute of Internal Audit Standards that I communicate to the committee every year. So first, for the 2024 audit results, we issued 23 audits. It's very similar to what we issued last year, which was 24 audits. 86% had satisfactory results, with 14% being at our lowest rating of needs improvement. I think the results continue to demonstrate an overall culture of compliance and risk management throughout the institution. Though there's always room for improvement, and as we've discussed before, there are impacts of resource constraints that we see in various units, and that's being reflected in additional issues that we're identifying through our reports. But overall, the institution continues to have that culture of compliance and risk management. I want to note that there are 9 additional audits that are currently in progress, or we refer to as carry forward, and 1 audit that was deferred from our FY24 audit plan that we plan to complete in FY 2025. This is more than we typically would have for carry forward audits and for deferrals. There's a few factors going into that. One being our staffing, where we lost one of our 2 dedicated IT auditors during the year, so that impacted our ability to complete some of our IT audit work. In addition, frankly, some of these audits just took a little bit longer than we were expecting. I mentioned before the splitting of music and theater as an example. In addition, the audits of Central Server Administration, Next Gen Med, UMD Athletics all took more resources than we were originally budgeting for. However, the one audit that we did not start is a Tier 2 audit, and I'll talk a little bit more about the difference in Tier 1 and Tier 2 when I get into the FY25 audit. We also worked on 11 investigations, and we completed 2 SNAP reviews, including the one I just mentioned in my previous remarks. So the development of the FY25 audit plan. So every year we begin by doing large data polls from the University of Minnesota's various systems of records, primarily PeopleSoft, in order to get an idea of the financials, the enrollment, some of those things that might be happening in the various colleges and units throughout the institution. We also review prior year audit work to get an idea of various risks that may be happening that we need to address. We then go into our risk analysis step, where we work with university leadership and the board. We met with 125 different people this year across 47 different units to gather their perspectives on the various institutional risks, processes that they may have questions about, concerns, et cetera. We review recent publications for university top risk. We survey other research institutions, especially our Big Ten peers, on particular audits or audits that they have conducted recently that they thought was particularly worthwhile, or in some cases, situations that maybe they have had a risk that has caught them off guard that they think that we should be thinking about. We also review the federal agencies' audit priorities that they publish. From that information, we then develop our audit plan. We do a mixture of a quantitative and qualitative risk assessment to put all of our various units, and I'll talk a little bit more about our unit risk model breakdown, but to put all those various units in a high, medium, low tier type model. We also ensure that our audit plan has good coverage of the institutional risk profile and of the university strategic plan, currently Impact 2025. Then finally, communication. So we communicate this audit plan to the university's president to make sure that there's anything that he may see that we should be considering. We talk to committee leadership, board leadership, and now presenting here. So once we have a list of things that we would like to do, we have to think about how many resources we have. So from the allocation of resources perspective, this is how we break down the use of our resources to be able to conduct various audits that we're going to do. This slide also provides you some view on what our actuals were versus budget for FY24, as well as what we're budgeting for FY25. So first, for scheduled audits, our actual is higher than our budget. I think that's partly because we were able to use some time that we had held for investigations and for special requests to be able to accomplish more of our scheduled audits. Our investigation number was lower than budgeted. We like to keep it around that 6-7% because there are years in which we have a major investigation which takes a lot of resources that we want to hold that time. We did conduct more investigations this year than last year, but overall they were not extremely time intensive, so it did not use up that whole budget. We save approximately 14%. Next year we'll have 13%. Some of these numbers, by the way, are a bit of a rounding issue, just based upon all these numbers, I should say, take a step back, are based upon our staffing levels. So we've built this plan currently with the idea that those 2 open positions I mentioned, or the 2 open positions that we currently have that I previously mentioned, that we will have those filled at least by January. If we fill it earlier, we'll have a little bit more time. Fill it later, we'll have less. So some of these numbers are just due to the rounding. So the board in administrative request special projects, this includes all of our transition reviews that we do. This includes potential time if there was any requests related to the healthcare enterprise in the next year, questions related to peak, things that the board or that the administration might request for us to take a look at. Follow-up, which you're all very familiar with and we just walked through. We are going to hold 6% next year. Our actuals this year was 8%. And then administration is at 19%, which is higher than what we would like. It is a drop from the 25% that it was in fiscal year 2023. And I think this number is reflective of the fact that we've had a number of people who have turned over in the last few years that requires additional training, hiring, onboarding, as well as there's certain administrative tasks that just need to happen. And the fewer people you have, it's going to mean that the overall percent of the administration is going to go up. So we're hopeful that this number will come down now that we only have the 2 openings, and we're hoping to fill those by January. I should note that this administration also includes items of internal improvement like data analytics, some of our management of our internal software, et cetera. I will just tell the committee, we're talking internally about updating these metrics for next year. We've used these same metrics for many, many years, but we may come back next year and provide both these metrics and a new model that we think might be a little bit more illustrative of the types of work that we're doing, but just as an FYI. So for deploying our audit resources, again, we look to try to hit the high risk activities. We try to make sure that we have good coverage of all the major organizational components throughout the institution. We look at that institutional risk profile to make sure that our audit work is tying to it, the strategic priorities I mentioned before, and board and management requests. So from an audit risk assessment, we break the institution every single unit, every single department will roll up into 174 separate auditable units that we look at. We, again, from a combination of quantitative and qualitative assessment, we break those into 3 risk buckets. Typically, we're around 25 high risk, around that 100 mark for the moderate risk, and 40, 50 within the low risk. We spend obviously most of our resources on the high and moderate, but we do believe that it's important to have some audit coverage in the low risk, where we will do maybe 1 audit a year or every other year. I think that's important, 1, for units to know that everyone may get audited, and 2, sometimes we go into these audits thinking they're low risk and we discover they have a whole lot of processes that we were not aware of, and that there could be additional risks that we identify and then work on through that, which has occurred. So from all of this risk assessment, risk analysis work, and all these discussions, some key themes that we identified this year, I'm sure many of you are not surprised by them, and some of these are the same as they were last year. First is the healthcare partnerships, which is a major risk area. And I will, jumping a little ahead here, but I will note that we don't have necessarily a particular area held on our audit plan at this point, but this will be something that we'll be keeping an eye on and thinking about either as a special request or as possibly an audit that we swap in if there is a particular need. Enrollment and finances remain a major risk at the institution. I don't need to remind you all on a day when you're going to be reviewing the budget. And just to tie that out again to what I was saying before, those do have impacts on the control environments and people's ability to ensure that they're staying in compliance and addressing risks. Staffing, leadership turnover, hiring, and workforce challenges. Information security and data management, which is something we were just speaking about earlier and something that'll probably always be on here. The cyber risks are just getting larger. The bad actors are becoming more sophisticated. Unfortunately, it's a bit of an arms race. And it's very, very difficult to do this in a decentralized environment. So the higher education as a whole, this is a major, major issue. Campus safety continues to be a priority and continues to be a major area of risk. And then administrative operations and changes. This ties back to those financing questions, but as well as the implementation of peak and some of the things that units are trying to figure out what their new worlds are going to look like. And anytime when you're going through a period of transition, there's always risk that's going to happen that as part of that transition to make sure everything's getting handed off. So our audit plan. So we break our audit plan into unit audits and process audits. As a reminder to the committee, we think of unit audits as our verticals, and we think of process audits as horizontals. So what do I mean by that? So for a unit audit, we're typically going to say we're going to come into a department, a college, or maybe a subdivision of a department or college and say, what is everything that this unit does, and where are the areas of highest risk, and where are the areas that we want to spend some audit resources to make sure that they're addressing those risks appropriately. Versus a process audit where we may take a single process and say, regardless of where it's happening at the institution, how are we doing at managing those processes? So for our unit audits, for the high risk, we have 2 items on here, athletics and university services IT. The thing I want to note with athletics is that for many, many years, we have done a sport NCAA compliance audit in the Twin Cities every year. We're currently working on our men's and women's hockey audits as we speak. But we're thinking next year that we're actually going to take a step back from that, given all the changes related to NCAA compliance, and instead look at some other administrative processes within athletics. I want to be a little bit flexible on this as this environment is constantly changing, as you all know. So what we may actually come and audit next spring might be a little bit different than what I tell you now. But one area I am thinking about is drug testing. And just making sure that is being done consistently and fairly for all the various athletes. University service IT is the other high risk. They are going through a process in university services of consolidating and trying to optimize their IT services across many, many different units that were once much more siloed. And so as more and more of those services are being done centrally, we thought it would be appropriate for us to take a look at that central process. A few items to identify or to highlight here in the moderate risk category. We have CIDRAP on the list. Coming out of the pandemic, we think this would be an appropriate time for us to take a look at this. Hopefully we don't have another pandemic anytime soon, but now is the time to do it when we currently are in a lull. The CFANS Arboretum, They have some pretty unique processes out there, and in including have a separate foundation that supports their efforts that we're responsible for doing gift testing on, as I informed the committee about, or is included in your audit update materials, that we will go and look at gift testing related to both the foundation and at the Arboretum. So this will help get us a little bit better coverage on that tie out as well. The electrical and computer engineering, we typically do one audit a year in CSE, and in neuroscience, we typically do one audit a year coming out of the medical school. So that's standard. UMD, we have 2 audits proposed. Again, pretty standard to do two audits at UMD for the last few years. We try to have one that's a little bit more on the academic side, one that's a little bit more on the operational side. For the University of Minnesota Morris, we handle Morris, Crookston, and Rochester differently. Majority of the audit work that we do there for the unit, from a unit audit perspective, is we actually bring a large team and try to hit all the various risks, kind of top to bottom at the same time. It's been 6 years since the last time we did Morris, so it's their turn. So folks are going to get to go visit the beautiful Morris campus here next year. Speaking of low risk audits, there's one audit that's on the list that we're planning on doing this year, the Center for Urban and Regional Affairs. We haven't done an audit there since 2001. It feels like it's an appropriate time to take a look at that. Some unique processes related to community partnerships, et cetera. One other thing to highlight on this slide before I move on, the bold versus the not bold. So the bold are the tier 1 audits. These are the audits that we are committing to complete as our top priority over the next fiscal year. So if we have resource constraints, if we need to swap out an audit for some higher priority item, we plan to do the tier 1 audits, and we would think about swapping out those tier 2 audits. As you may recall, this year we did swap out the tier 2 audit of the Minnesota Supercomputing Institute for the data management audit, which is an audit that we're currently working through and is one of those carried forward audits. Process audits. So again, these are more of what we think of as the horizontals. There's the digital identity management, which is the IAM follow-up, where we'll again sample a few of those risks and treat it more as a standard audit. There's lab safety, inclusive of our BSL-3 labs, which is the highest risk labs that the University of Minnesota works with. Purchasing, it's a very large area. We won't do all of purchasing, but we're going to select some processes to take a look at in there. And those are the 3 from the high risk. From the moderate risk, 2 things to note here. The SSBCI Venture Capital Program, this is a new program that's a partnership between Minnesota DEED and the University of Minnesota to provide some venture capital to various Minnesota businesses. It's federally funded, it's new, and it's unique, and so we thought it'd be appropriate to go take a look at that. The Student Affairs Care Team, that is the audit that we deferred from FY24 into FY 2025. And so this is an item that we'll be now covering as part of the FY25 plan. Just saw an error there, I should say FY 2025. I won't go through this in great detail, but just to remind the committee, the institutional risk profile was provided to the committee back in September and then updated at the May committee meeting. We went through our audit plan and made sure that we're getting coverage of all the various risks that were identified as part of that institutional risk profile. If you have any questions, we can talk through how we're seeing how these tie out, but wanted to lay this out for you, and the more details are in your doc materials. For ensuring that we have good coverage of all the major components, I think this year we have a pretty broad coverage, especially with doing the Morris campus. We have a little bit better coverage on our system campuses. But I think that overall you can see that we have coverage of everything from IT risk, human resources, research, as well as the provost's office, which is always going to be the largest. So the 2025 audit plan, in my professional opinion, provides reasonable audit coverage across all major university components, addresses risks currently impacting the university, and addresses risk areas identified by the Board of Regents as important. So for ERM and PEAK, again, as we just mentioned, I continue to ensure that we're aligning our work with the ERM program, as well as continue to support its implementation. Part of that is going to be an expectation that there's going to be presentations to the Audit and Compliance Committee related to your duties assigned by board policy to have oversight of that program, but also just helping them to get established with the Administrative Steering Committee doing those initial risk assessments, et cetera. From a peak perspective, I continue to participate in the peak steering committee. And we, as you saw in our previous item, we monitor and report on the peak impacts to audit work and to potential remediation plans. As I've mentioned to you before, but to reiterate, I really believe that as peak gets more solidified and it is covering all units around the institution, we may see more and more of our audit work ending up in that process audit category and less in the unit audit category, because there's going to be these central processes that we can come and look at, sample, and get an idea of how is it covering those risks for the overall institution, which frankly I believe will be much better audit coverage and give us a much better sense of how we're managing the risk for the institution. And that'll be a change from where we have to go into the unit and figure out how they're managing each of those individual risks. So my last slide, other communications. There was no impairments to independence in FY24. This is something I'm required by Institute of Internal Audit Standards to inform you if there was any pushback or any efforts by the administration to keep us from doing our work. I'm glad to report that again in FY24 that did not happen. Other thing to note is in FY25, we're going to be doing our external quality assurance review. As I've told you before, this answers the question of who audits the auditor. Yes, we get audited. So once every 5 years, we take a look at how internally we first do an assessment of how we are complying with Institute of Internal Audit Standards, and then we bring a group of chief auditors or other audit professionals, typically from higher education institutions, to come in and make sure that they agree that we're in compliance with Institute of Internal Audit Standards and you're being well served by your internal audit department. The current plan is to have them on campus in October. We'll be working with the board office to schedule some meetings with audit committee leadership, board leadership, administration, et cetera. Other thing to note is simultaneously, the Institute of Internal Audit is changing their audit standards. And so those new standards are going into effect in January. So as part of our internal review, we're not only going to say how we're complying with the current standards, but also how are we doing on the or what would we need to change to stay in compliance with the new standards going forward. Remind the committee you have very highly professional internal audit department. All but three members of the internal audit department are either credentialed or have an advanced degree, and they work very, very hard for this institution. We're also actively recruiting for 2 open auditor positions. As I mentioned before, if you know anybody, let us know, because as Regent Davenport mentioned, the market does remain very challenging for auditors. And finally, the internal audit budget status. I just want to remind the committee that the internal audit department, we do operate at a structural deficit. We have taken a few reallocations which are consistent with what is asked of all departments around the institution. We don't have any other revenue sources though, and 95% of our expenses are related to salary. We do have a healthy carry forward balance and we're able to weather these deficits for a period of time. We've talked to the administration about it, they're aware, and we will have to just think about what are some long-term solutions to that structural deficit if those carry forward balances start to drop. And with that, I will open up to questions.
Thank you. Is there any discussion?
Didn't leave a lot of time for it, but
Please, Regent Kenyon.
Yeah, thank you. I was just going to comment on, I mean, I think from the audit perspective, there's some excitement about standardization. I think that's a fair way to describe it. Yeah, so you can't even hold it in. I would just say, I think we're going to have to document or capture exceptions because there will inevitably be things that aren't covered in the standard processes, and make sure we have a good repository roster of what those are to make sure those are still in the audit rotation.
Absolutely. Just briefly, Chair Gully, Regent Kenyanya. Yes, I can't pretend I'm not somewhat excited about standardization of control processes because we just frankly, we will never have enough audit resources to be able to get comfort that that risk is being managed if it's being managed in hundreds of different ways. And not to mention all of the downstream automation that can't happen, as Vice President Glodchuk was talking about before. But to your point, I don't see a future where there isn't a future where there's no unit audits happening anymore, or that there aren't some processes where by the nature of what they're doing, it just doesn't fit into the peak model. They've received exceptions. They have to do things that are unique. And we'll have to continue to think about how we are assessing that risk and making sure they're managing it in those individual units.
Thank you.
Other questions?
Seeing no more questions, thank you. That brings us to the consent report. Chief Auditor Goswick, will you summarize the items in today's consent report?
Thank you, Chair Gully. There's one consent report item today. It's on page 77 of your docket materials. This item involves Deloitte being jointly engaged by the university and Fairview to provide due diligence services related to the hospital letter of intent. Deloitte was contracted to do this work as one, they have special expertise in this space that neither the university or Fairview has. Also, as being an independent party, both sides can rely on their work and not have to duplicate that. This is being brought to the committee as a review in action to support the time-sensitive nature of the due diligence work. And if there's any questions, there are others here who are more knowledgeable about the details.
Before we turn to discussion, is there a motion to recommend the approval of the consent report?
So moved. Second.
Thank you very much. Is there any discussion?
Madam Chair. I would just comment that Deloitte is no longer our external auditor, so there's no independence conversation to be had here.
Chair Kelly, Regent Kenyanya, they're no longer our external auditor, that's true, and the Controller's Office in their review of this type of work didn't feel that it would preclude them from doing external audit work in the future either, given that this is assurance work. So it isn't like they would be relying on, it's not like they're providing consulting services or something of that nature that may create that sort of conflict.
Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions or comments? There being no further discussion, we appear to be ready to vote. All those in favor of approving the consent report, please say aye.
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 Thank you. All those opposed? Then it carries. So thank you so much. Our final item today is the information items. Chief Auditor Goswick, anything to highlight?
Yes, thank you, Chair Gully, members of the committee. There's two information items today on page 78 of your document materials. The university had two engagements with audit firms for less than $100,000. Again, as just mentioned, similarly, both these were assessed to not create any sort of independence issues going in the future. One of these engagements was with Deloitte to perform procedures related to commercial paper offerings. The other information item was work that Ernst & Young did with the Office of General Counsel. The second information item is the annual report on institutional risk and financial reports. As a reminder to the committee, this is the second year that was presented in this form as a combined report where it was once two separate reports, and it's also now been put under the broader umbrella of the enterprise risk management effort. This item includes an overview of the application of insurance towards risk reduction, updates on active projects within the Office of Insurance, overview of financial controls that currently exist, and specific compliance updates, including on the Graham-Leach-Bliley Act. And my prepared remarks if you have any questions.
Yeah. Any questions or discussion?
I'm gonna control myself.
It's okay, we have 1 minute.
Yeah,
All right. There being no additional business before the committee, we stand adjourned.
Excellent. You're so afraid of breaking.